So, good evening, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. I'll be introducing Edgar D'Souza. Edgar D'Souza has a master's degree in tourism and hospitality management and is currently pursuing a PhD in management studies on the topic A Study on Tourists' Drinking Behavior in Alco-Tourism. He is the author of the book Food and Beverage, A Practical Guide, published by Rupa Publications in India. He was a part of the five-member committee appointed to draft the FENI policy in 2020 for the government of Goa. He was also instrumental in preparing a FENI industry report that was submitted to the Goa Excise Department in 2019. He is a member of the Board of Studies in Tourism Studies, and he is a subject expert since 2017 for Goa Board of Secondary and Higher Secondary Education, and he was the convener of Board of Studies in Hospitality and Tourism and a member of the Academic Council for the period of 2013 to 17. He has an academic teaching experience of over 14 years and has taught food and beverage service and management at IIAS, at Agnel Institute of Food Crafts and Culinary Sciences, and at Goa University. He has organized wine appreciation sessions and winery tours to Nasik and Bangalore for his students. He has worked as a wine sommelier and restaurant supervisor at Paradise Island, Maldives, and as a restaurant manager in reputed hotels such as Golden Tulip, Leela Palace, Goa, World Trade Center Hotel in Dubai, Madinat Jumeirah, Dubai, and Royal Hyatt, Kuwait. His passion for wines has led him to make various homemade fruit wines such as grape red wine, pomegranate, banana, passion fruit, apple, beetroot, kokum, guava, pineapple, and ginger wine. So all this hyping up, I hope you are very excited. Let's welcome Edgar D'Souza.
Thank you, Laila. That was a wonderful introduction that you have given for me. I will share a presentation with you all now, and if there are any questions, I will take it at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Right, so the topic of today's session will be understanding wines. Yeah, so although wines is a topic that actually cannot be covered in an hour's time, I will try to do justice in at least trying to give you all a brief about what it is. We'll look at the classifications of wines. We'll look at the winemaking process in brief. I will also help you all to appreciate wines in terms of wine tasting. Although I will not be actually giving you wine to taste, but you all could always take a glass of wine at home, wherever you all are. And as I'm explaining this, you could probably take a sip of wine and be able to appreciate the wines. That's fair enough. And of course, I will be helping you all with certain tips on how to pair wines with foods. So that is the objective of today's session. I know it's a lot to finish within 1 hour, but we'll see how fast we can go with things. And if there are any questions, then we can take it up at the end. Otherwise, the discussions will never end. First of all, what is wine? So wine is an alcoholic beverage because it has alcohol content inside. And it is made from the fermentation of the juice of freshly gathered grapes. So that is how you would generally define a wine. In case the term wine, okay, we just have the term wine, that means it compulsorily means that it is made from grape juice, fermented grape juice. We also have different types of fruit wines, but then we just can't call it wine. We would have to take the name of the fruit and then add the term wine next to it. For example, grape wine or pomegranate wine. Yeah, but the term just wine suggests that it is made from freshly gathered grapes, fermented juice of freshly gathered grapes. So the fermentation generally takes place in according to local traditions, according to local practices. And generally, when you look at worldwide, there's just a small area in the world which actually produces wines. Right, this is because generally grapes would only grow in a place which is favorable for the growing of wines, that is VINES, wines. And what we actually require for this is a moderate amount of rainfall, that is to grow the wines. We would need sufficient sun to ripen those grapes, and of course winters that are moderate yet sufficiently cool, I would say, to give the wine a chance to rest and restore its strength for the growing and the fruiting seasons that follow. So generally, when you look at the globe, these wine producing zones are generally between 50 degrees and 30 degrees and 15 degrees north as well as south of the equator. Among the wine growing countries, Italy is ranked as the largest producer of wines, followed by France. Uh, Although they say that France is responsible for giving us quality wines, but the other countries also have started making excellent quality wines now. Next in order comes countries like Spain, USA, Australia, Argentina. We have Germany, Portugal, okay, South Africa. Even India makes a fair amount of wines, and some of the wines are even exported. Um, Let us look at the classification of wines. So if we talk about how wines are classified, there are various ways of classifying wines. These are just three of the ways. Firstly, you could classify them according to the color. So when we classify wines according to the color, we can classify them as white wines, red wines, or rosé wines. Then you have blush wines. White wines are generally they range from pale straw, okay, the slightly green tinge. So these are young wines to up to a dark gold kind of a color, really matured wines, medium to full-bodied wines. It is produced from both white as well as black grapes. Okay, so there's a notion that white wine is made from white grapes and red is made from red, but white wines can also be made from the black grapes or the red grapes as we call them. Okay, it is basically because of the skin that imparts the color. So if you remove or you prevent the must, okay, or the skin from coming in contact with the juice, that is after pressing you get rid of the must, then the wine will not take the color of the black skin, right? And you can make a white wine from the red grapes. So that is white wine. Then of course we have the red wine. So the color of the red wine ranges from a purple kind of a color when they are young to it gets to really deep burgundy to brick red later on as it ages. And compulsorily, the red wines are made from red grapes because we allow the skin to remain with the ferment throughout the fermentation process, okay, to be able to get that nice deep red kind of a color. So the coloring pigments which are present in the skin is actually what gives the color to the wines, right? And then we have rosé wines, which can be made from either allowing the black grapes to ferment, okay, for up to 48 hours, okay, or you could probably mix red wine and white wine together to make a rosé wine, or by pressing to the grapes to the extent that you have achieved a rosé kind of a tinge to the wine, right? So these are different ways of making a rosé wine, but the characteristic of a rosé wine would be that similar somewhere in between that of a white wine and a red wine, right? uh, you also have something called as blush wine, but blush wines are generally associated with USA, so it has got a slight tinge of pink. That's why it's called as a blush wine. Then we can classify it according to the taste, and if you classify wines according to the taste, we could classify it as dry, sweet, and medium. So when we say dry, we generally associate dryness to the absence of sugar which is present in the wines. Okay, so a dry wine is a wine wherein all the sugar has been converted into alcohol. Now, generally, when we are fermenting, what happens to the sugars is that the yeast acts upon the sugar which is present in the juice and converts it into alcohol. So if you are allowing the yeast to convert all the sugars into alcohol, the resulting wine will be a dry wine, which which will have absolutely no sweetness. Then we have a sweet wine, which is obtained when there is some sugar left after fermentation. That could the fermentation could either be stopped naturally or intentionally. So the winemaker can either stop it naturally or intentionally. You could probably stop it beforehand, but the corresponding wine will be lesser in alcohol because you're not allowing the yeast to fully act on the sugars. or you probably add a little bit of alcohol to it to stop the fermentation process. And then we have the medium, which is neither too dry nor too sweet. Okay, so it has a little bit of traces of sugar, which is left after the fermentation process. So that is how we would classify wines according to the taste. And then according to the nature, then we have the still wines, sparkling wines, fortified wines, and the aromatized wines. Wherein still wines are wines which are obtained from natural fermentation, uh, and we do not allow the carbon dioxide gas which is produced as a result of fermentation. No? We allow it to escape. So these are typically table wines, and those wines which are generally served along with the meals, they are called as still wines. Then we have sparkling wines. These are wines which are bottled with the carbon dioxide gas, which is produced during the fermentation. So they are bubbly in nature, they've got efflorescence, and we generally associate the word champagne with sparkling wine. Alcoholic content of all these wines would be between 10 to 13%. Yeah. And then we have fortified wines, which are wines that have been fortified, or basically you add grape spirit to the wine to increase the alcoholic content, right? We in Goa generally are very dear to this wine called as port wine, right? And port is a typical example of fortified wine, you know, where the alcoholic content is between 16 to 22 degrees alcohol by volume, ABV. The these wines are generally very heavy, alcohol content is high, generally had along with desserts, and that's why they are sometimes also called as dessert wines. And examples of these wines are sherry, then you have port, Madeira, Masala. These are all different examples of fortified wines. And then, of course, you have the aromatized wines, which are fortified and then aromatized with different herbs or barks or spices or roots, etc. And the alcoholic content of aromatized wines would range between 14 to 20, 18, 20%. Examples of aromatized wine would be the vermouths. No? So we have the dry vermouth or the sweet vermouth. You must have heard of the drink martini. Yeah? So vermouth is something that goes into this martini. And martini is a brand name as well, which makes a lot of vermouths. So this is a little bit about the classification of wines. We move ahead to the grape varieties. So the wine species that produces the grapes suitably for wine production are a wine variety which is called as Vitis vinifera. Okay, and most of the varieties which are planted in Europe or elsewhere, and even in India for that matter, okay, evolve around these species, and generally we achieve them through cross breeding, etc., to suit the local soils and climate. Um, Generally, the same type of grape could be called differently in different places. For example, you have the Syrah in France, which is also called as Shiraz in other countries. No? And each of these grapes are distinct in characteristics, distinct in flavor. And some of the popular white grapes are Chardonnay, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Chenin Blanc. So these are typically the very, very popular white grapes. And generally, when you ask for a wine, many of the wines are named after the grapes as well. Okay, and that's why you'll find all these names so familiar in case you all have been drinking wines. Next, we have black grapes, and examples are Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Shiraz. So these are different examples, and the pictures of these grapes are just below the names. Okay, so that is what the grapes would look like. So unlike the grapes that we generally get in the market, these grapes are slightly different. Okay, they do not taste the same, and these are specific grapes that have been used, which are generally used for wine making, and not the table grapes which you generally find in the market. Next, let us look at some of the factors that can influence the character of the wines. Firstly, we have the plant's environment. Yeah, so environment is basically factors such as the climate, the weather, the soil, okay, and all these factors generally would affect not only the quality but also the quantity of the fruit. Okay, now as we know that heat is generally essential because the plants uses the sunlight and chlorophyll to produce the glucose. Okay, and it needs for the growth and the vigor. Likewise, even adequate amount of rainfall also is required to grow the crop. And as I told you earlier, the winters also are required to make it nice and supple. So likewise, the mineral content of the soil and the groundwater also determines the composition of the acids and other trace minerals that would be present, and that is what generally gives the aroma of the wine or influences the aroma of the wine. Uh, Climates can sometimes be a blessing or sometimes even a curse. So sometimes, what happens is due to extreme rainfall, extreme sunshine, or hailstorms, or wind, or frost, these also damage the grapes. Sometimes there is a particular kind of a rot which affects the grapes. And those rots sometimes would be useful, or sometimes they may destroy the plant. For example, there's a rot called as a noble rot, which actually makes the grape very sweet, and those type of grapes are then used for preparing sweet wines. Then we have the grape variety, and as we know, each of the grape variety has a distinct aroma, a distinctive feature, and all these also play a role in determining the quality of the wine or the character of the wine. Then we have the ripeness of the grape. So how ripe the grapes are will definitely affect the sweetness and the acidity level of the wine. um, in case you want to make a wine which is going to be sweet in nature, then you would have to go through something called as a late harvest for those grapes, because the late harvested grapes would be really rich in sugar content, and typically these kind of grapes would be suitable to make your sweet wines. Next, we have something called as a viticulture, and viticulture is nothing but all the stages that is the stages of wine growing, rather, which includes the plowing, the pruning, weeding, harvesting, and all this generally happens during a particular month of the year, considering the weather. So any delay in the schedule will definitely influence the character of the wine. No? And as I give you an example of the late harvested grapes. No? So if you delay in harvesting, the grapes would become sweet and the resulting wine would be sweet as well. Next, we have something called as vinification, which is the process of winemaking. So the time allowed for the fermentation, the temperature that is maintained during the fermentation, the type of yeast that is used for during fermentation, what type of containers you generally used for the maturation, that is either you're using stainless steel or the oak. All these would determine the character of the wine. Also for the aging process, for example, all these determine the character of the wine, and these are things that come under the vinification process. And lastly, we have the aging, which also determines the character of the wine. Longer the wine is allowed to mature, the mellower and smoother will be the wine. Yeah, and generally, when you age a wine, it generally takes the flavor of the vanillin from the wood. Uh, See, wines have to be stored at right temperatures, right? So it has to be free from direct sunlight, from vibrations, and that's why you generally find them in these cellars, right, where there is no extreme fluctuation of temperatures. A poor storage would definitely affect the quality of the wine. So these are some of the different factors that would influence the character of the wine. That's why it's very important that whenever we are storing our wines, we store them properly, right? We store them probably in a cool place, in a dry place, in even refrigerated for that matter, yeah, because it will stay much better like this. Next, let us look at some of the faults that you would find in wine. Sometimes you drink a wine and you find that something's probably wrong with it, but you really don't know what is the problem with the wine and whether it is fit for consumption or not. Okay, so this slide will probably take us through those issues, those problems. Firstly, excess sulfur. Now, during the fermentation process, we add a little bit of sulfur dioxide, okay, and this is generally added to check the action of the wild yeast which is present on the molds of the grapes. Sulfur dioxide also acts as a preservative, okay, and addition of too much of this also creates a problem, and it leaves a very, very unpleasant smell, which it resembles something like a burnt matchstick, okay, that type of a smell you would get. Nothing wrong with the wine, okay. Generally, what you have to do with such a wine is you have to allow it to air for some time or allow it to decant for some time. Decanting is a process wherein you transfer the wine into a decanter, which is a broad-based container, glass container with a narrow top, so that the wine airs properly and any unpleasant aromas, etc., will escape. Okay. The other way of doing it is probably swirl your glass till those unpleasant odors they go off. So that is what you do in case you find that there is some excessive sulfur kind of a smell that's coming out from your wine. Next is oxidation. Oxidation generally happens when the wine is exposed to oxygen for a long time. Okay, resulting in something which is very brownish in color. Okay, the wine will look dull. It'll smell flat. Okay, not very nice to drink, and ideally do not drink a wine that has assumed a dull or brownish kind of a color and is generally not suitable for drinking. Next, we have something that is corked. Now, generally, when you give a tasting of wine to a guest in a restaurant, or if in case you are hosting a party and the waiter serves you a wine, this is something that you need to check, okay, before the waiter goes around and serves the wines to the other members of the guest. Sometimes what happens is the wine bottles are closed with corks, and they retain the characteristics, and they pull out the flavors of the cork as well, right? And if the cork has been affected by any mold or any bacteria, especially there's something called as TCA, okay? TCA is basically trichloroanisole. It gives the wine a very foul smell and a bad taste. Okay, so this such kind of a wine should not be consumed. Okay, return the wine in case you're in a restaurant and you feel that the wine is giving a off smell like that. This is because of the faulty cork, and the wine has absorbed the flavor of that cork. Okay, so this type of wine should be returned back and ask them to serve you another bottle of wine. Okay, so nothing can be done. Decanting will not help to solve this problem. Next is acidification, as we call it, or the wine has turned into vinegar. So this is also called generally when the wine is overexposed to the air, and the vinegar microbe develops, okay, a film on the surface of the wine, and acetic acid is produced in the wine, okay, causing the wine to turn into vinegar. It will make the wine very sour to taste, resembling that of wine vinegar. So do not drink a wine like that. Okay, you can probably use it for making a salads or something like that. Next is secondary fermentation. Generally, in case there are traces of sugar or yeast that are left back in the bottle of the wine, okay, the wine would start a kind of a secondary fermentation in the bottle itself, which results in a very unpleasant, tickly taste, okay, which should not be confused to the sparkling wines, which have got a natural sparkle as a result of the secondary fermentation. Now, this one has, it's not intended, and generally happens because there are some yeast cell and sugar contents in the wine, okay. So nothing wrong with the wine, but it's not very refreshing to drink such a wine, okay. Doesn't taste very good because this secondary fermentation is not really intended. It has happened because of this yeast which is present in the wine. And lastly, you might see some certain sediments which are there inside, okay, certain foreign materials which are there inside, which generally happens due to faulty bottling, okay, or it could also happen because of improper racking or finning, which is generally done, and the wine is not clear enough. That over a period of time could leave certain sediments. Nothing wrong with it. You can decant the wine and you can have this wine. Okay. So this is something regarding the different faults of wine and what to do in case you encounter something like this. Next, we'll come to naming of wines. So generally, there are three methods how wines are named. Generally, if you look at a wine list, you will find that there are different names given to wines. And for us to be able to identify how it is named, okay, this slide will help us. So first one is the varietal. Varietal is the most common method of naming wines. No, it is based on the name of the wine or the variety of the wine that has been used. So the key to naming a wine is based on the percentage of the grapes that is used for making this wine. So in case you have a wine that is made by one or more grapes, okay, the the one which has got a maximum content of grape variety over there, you will generally find that name on the bottle, or the wine will be named after that particular wine. So most wines will not state the other varieties that make up the smaller percentage of the wine in that bottle. Generally, you would also find a wine which is just made from one grape variety, and generally you'll find that name on the bottle. For example, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz. Okay, all these are varietal wines. Next, wine could be named in by having a generic name. Now, generic names are basically associated with the place of origin. So they are named after the place that they come from. European wines, particularly those from Italy and France, are generally named after the location or region where the wine comes from, okay, or from where the wines are made. So naming the wine after the region will give us an idea about which region it has come from, because there are certain regions which are very popular in a country for winemaking. You must have heard of Burgundy or Bordeaux, or Champagne for that matter, or in Italy or the Piedmont region. So these are very famous regions, and wine coming out from those regions are supposed to be the best in quality. For example, in Italy, we have the Veneto region, which gives us wines such as Amarone, then there is Barbera or Bardolino. So these are very popular wines from Italy, from the Veneto region. Likewise, from the Piedmont region, we have a couple of wines like Asti Spumanti, then you have the Barbaresco, yeah, very popular over there. You must have heard of the word Chianti, or Brunello di Montalcino. So these, and Piedmont as well. These are very popular wines from the Tuscany region of Italy. So these are typically generic wines. When you talk about French wines, I'm sure you must have come across the word Burgundy, Bordeaux. Okay, so Beaujolais, for example, is a wine that comes from eastern France. Bordeaux is a wine that comes from the Bordeaux region of France. Then we have Burgundy, Chablis, which comes from the Burgundy region of France. And I'm sure you must have all heard of the word Champagne. Now, Champagne is a place in France, and the sparkling wine that comes out from the Champagne region of France is called a Champagne. Then we have Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which comes from the Rhône Valley. So these are generic wines and are named after the place of origin. And lastly, we have the proprietary wines, which have got a brand name. So advantage of naming wines based on proprietary labels is it gives the winemaker an opportunity to blend wines according to their judgment. So they need not put the name of the grape on the label, right? They can just put a brand name. Examples of this would be, for example, you have this wine estate of Sula. They make a wine called as Sula Rasa Shiraz. So that becomes a brand name. Then we have from the Myra vineyards, we have something called as a Myra Misfit. From the Fratelli vineyards, we have something called as a Sette. From growers, we have something called as La Reserve. So these are all proprietary wines. Okay, so this is how we name wines depending on the varietal, depending on generic, and depending on the proprietary. Next, we'll move on to the winemaking process. Time will not permit me to go it in detail, so I'll quickly go through the entire process of winemaking as fast as I can. Firstly, harvesting the grapes. For making white wine, as I told you, we can use both white as well as red grapes. Okay, so both of these could be harvested in case you want to make white wines, and it's important when you harvest that, right? So the ripeness is a major factor that affects the wine flavors. So it is important that we harvest the grapes at the right moment. Generally, on a label of a bottle, you'll see a year. 1996 or 2000 or something like that. So this year is basically not the year of bottling, but it is the year of the harvest. So it's very important that we understand the year of the harvest, because you could have a very good harvest in one year and not so good harvest in another year, and sommeliers would generally associate a good wine from a good harvest year. Okay. Then the harvested grapes are immediately sent to the winery, and they're put into a wine press, And this press basically squeezes the juices from the grapes, which is collected into a tank. Now, during this step, okay, sulfur dioxide may be added to stop the bacterial spoilage before the actual fermentation starts. The next step after that, the juices are allowed to settle for some time, okay, to allow the suspended solids to come down, and then the yeast is added to the wine. Okay, now different types of yeast may be used. You could allow you could probably use a commercial yeast, or you could use a natural yeast which is already present on the bloom of the grapes, right? So the fermentation process generally starts automatically because the grapes already have the yeast on the blooms of the grape skins. Winemakers generally add a little bit of yeast because they are not very comfortable, in because we really don't know how much of yeast is actually present on those blooms. So a lot of winemakers actually add a lot of commercial yeast to aid their winemaking process. Then the fermentation process for white wines, it takes around 14 days to ferment. Okay, and the longer you ferment it, what will happen is the drier will be your wine. So malolactic fermentation is something that generally doesn't happen with white wines, but malolactic fermentation is basically conversion of malic acids that is found in wine into lactic acids, but generally not associated with white wines, although some wines like Chardonnays do go through a malolactic process. Next, we have the lees is stirred, okay, because the lees is basically what adds flavor to the wine. Lees are the particles that float up into the wine. No? So those are those dead yeast particles. So this is nicely stirred. And then you have the aging or blending. A wine may be aged for some time before it is before we actually bottle the wine. White wines need not be aged, but it's always good to keep it for some time, to remove the harshness of the wines. Wines may also be blended at this point of time, okay, because as I told you, there are different harvest years, and one harvest year might not be as good as the other. So winemakers generally keep a little bit of good wines from old years, okay, which can be used in blending later on to bring the wine to a consistent level. And lastly, they are bottled. Let us look at how red wine is made quickly. Now the process is almost the same. The only thing over here is the wines are pressed, and so the grapes are pressed and allowed to remain in the must throughout the fermentation process. And the pressing happens only once the fermentation process is actually over. Okay, this is the major difference between making white wine and a red wine. Otherwise, the process is the same. Malolactic fermentation takes place over here, and the little microbes which are there feasts on the wine acids and converts the sharp malic acids into lactic acid, so which becomes a little creamier, a little chocolatey in taste. White wine. Now, red wines are generally aged. Okay, they are generally kept in wooden barrels. You can keep them in concrete or glass or clay or stainless steel tanks, but you need to age it for some time. The wooden barrel generally would affect the flavor of the wine most noticeably, because then it imparts its flavor to the wine. So you'll get that kind of hint of vanilla sometimes, right? If you age it in any other kind of tank, it will help, because it will help in reducing the acidity which is present in the wines. Okay, so the longer you allow the wine to rest, okay, the smoother, the nuttier it will get with age. So that's the advantage of aging a wine. Then we blend the wines, as I told you earlier. Okay, blending helps to give the finesse, to help to the winemaker to get the right kind of a texture which is required for the palate. Okay, and to get the consistency also that is required in making the wine. So blending is done at this stage, and then they are bottled. Now, once the wines are bottled, generally do not age. Okay, they do not age, but some winemakers say that it is good to age certain wines, such as the Italians consider wines like Brunello di Montalcino. Okay, for example, it has to be bottle aged for a certain time, and then only it gets a status called as reserve bottling status, which they put it on the label afterwards. So this is, in a nutshell, this is how red wines are made. Next, we'll go quickly through how champagne is made. Okay, now where the process of red wine making or white wine making ends, the process of champagne making starts. Okay, so we already have something called as the first fermentation. Okay, you all must have heard of the word all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. Okay, yeah. So basically, champagne is a wine which is named after the region where it is grown, no? Where it is fermented, where it is bottled, and this is in the Champagne region of France. Now, in addition to the location, champagne also is different from other wines because of the type of grapes that are used. And three of the most predominant grape varieties are Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. So these are the grape varieties which are actually what champagne are made from. And there is a particular type of a method that is used for champagne method, which is called as a method traditional or method champenoise, which is the classic method. And this is basically how champagne is made. And it's a very tedious method, time consuming, labor intensive method. Okay. This is a method wherein the secondary fermentation actually takes place inside the bottle. Okay. And the wine bottle is aged for around 15 months, wherein the yeast is added, yeast and sugar is added inside the bottle. It is trapped with a crown cap, and they are put into these racks called as puputhries, wherein you do this riddling, wherein by hand, they keep on rotating this wines, and these bottles are kept in such a way that they are like upside down, so that the sediments collect at the neck of the bottle. And after this 15 months process, what happens is you have to then remove the crowns out by actually first of all freezing the necks of the bottles, and then opening those crown caps. So what happens is all these leaves which have settled at the mouth of the bottle, okay, they are ejected out under pressure, and then afterwards you add a little bit of dosage, or as we say, liqueur the expedition, which is sugar mixture which is added with a little bit of wine. And then you put the final cork and the agrafe on top of the bottle. So that is basically how champagnes are made. Tedious process, but that's the reason that they're so expensive. Okay. We'll look at the different types of glasses that are used for serving wines. As you can see, the first one on the right is a fortified wine, sweet wine. As I said, alcoholic content will be strong, will be a lot, and that's why we use a small glass, because it's a dessert wine, and since the alcohol content is a lot, we do not consume too much of it as well. Okay, the wines are generally poured to approximately around 150 ml. That means out of one bottle, you should get at least around 5 glasses of wines. Typically, that is how a sommelier would pour a wine into a glass. Now, if you can see the shapes of the wines, the white wine are smaller in bowl. The bowl shape would be comparatively smaller to that of the red wine. Okay, because the red wine glasses are made in such a way with a round bowl, a large opening, which will enable you to dip your nose inside to detect the aromas of the wine, because they have got complex aromas, complex flavors. Okay, and we would need space in the glass to be able to swirl it, to be able to smell it, to be able to allow it to aerate inside that, so that we can bring out the flavors. And when we drink the wine, the nose goes into the glass, and we can actually get the bouquet of the wine. Okay, so this complex flavors, they get nicely smoothened out inside this bowl of the glass when it is swirled. Unlike that, the white wine does not have too much of flavors and does not need the swirling, etc. Another thing is the temperature also, which we'll be looking at in the next slide. A red wine is generally served at closer to room temperatures, something between 12 to 18 degrees. And that's why when you're holding this glass, you can hold it by the bowl. Whereas a white wine, you will generally hold it by the stem, so that the heat of the hand doesn't come in contact with the glass, and the wine can stay chilled for a longer period of time. Looking at service temperatures of wines, you can see the whole range of service temperatures starting from 6 degrees to 18 degrees. So generally sparkling wines, champagnes, dry wines which are very, very young, like the Vinification from Portugal or the Moscato, the Pinot Gris, these can be served between 6 to 8 degrees. Then we have the rosé wines, the Riesling, Chardonnay, which are medium bodied, can be served between 8 to 10 degrees. Then we have Chardonnay, which is a medium to full-bodied white wine, can be served between 10 to 12 degrees. And then we have the light-bodied Pinot Noir, which is a red wine, can be served between 12 to 14. Heavier, medium-bodied can be served between 14 to 16. And the full-bodied red wines, like the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Merlot, the Shiraz, these can be served between 16 to 18 degrees. So closer to room temperature, but never ever serve a wine at the room temperature of India, please. Okay, because in some books you might see that red wine is served at room temperature, but these authors are authors from Europe, right? You know, and when they have written these books, they have written it in context with the temperatures in Europe. So if it's written serve red wines at room temperature, it does not mean the 32 degrees in Goa or in Chennai or in Kerala that we have over here. Okay, so coming to the last part of it, that is the guideline that we should consider while pairing wines and foods. Firstly, whenever you're serving wine, always start with a dry wine, okay, and then go towards the sweeter wines. That is rule number one. Secondly, always serve your white wine first, followed by the red wines. Never serve a red wine first and then a white wine. Okay, so the lighter flavored wines always serve first. So white wines first, then the red wines. The light wines before heavy wines. Okay, so in case you're having two types of wines of the same nature, serve the lighter bodied wines first and the heavier bodied. When I say body, I mean the density of the wine. Okay, the mouth feel that you get. Serve sparkling wines before still wine. So generally you would start off with a sparkling wine and then you would go into a still wine. Still wines are wines that do not have any efflorescence. And lastly, serve a young wine before a old wine. Okay, a mature wine should be served last. The traditional rules for pairing wines and foods. Firstly, the aperitif which is served before the meal should be dry and preferably wine based. Wine based because most of our appetizers, salads, etc. contain vinegar, and we would like to have something which is acidic in nature as well that should go along with this type of wines, and that's why a wine based aperitif. Starter courses are best served with dry white wines or dry rosé wines. So as I said earlier, start with dry and then move towards the sweet. National dishes are recommended with the wines of that country. For example, if you're serving a pasta like spaghetti bolognese, for example, you could give a red wine from Italy like Chianti. Shellfish and fish dishes are served with dry white wines. They go very well with it. White meats are served with medium white wines. Now over here, we are talking about a heavier wine, a wine that has probably been aged for some time, but yet a white wine. White meats are associated with poultry, with pork, okay, veal, etc. would come under white meat. So you could go ahead and serve a heavy, medium to heavy bodied white wine along with that. Whereas red meats go well with red wines. Okay, so generally white wine with white meats, red wine with red meat. This is a general notion, but at the end of the day, it all depends on what the guest would like to have. If a guest says, "I want to have a red wine with my fish," go ahead and serve it to them, or consume it if you like to have white wines. Okay, so these are all rule of the thumbs. Need not be followed. At the end of the day, it is the preference of the person, of the individual. If I like to have red wines with all my meals, then I will not follow any of these rules. So all the wines go well with cheese. However, generally port, okay, is traditionally served with wines with cheese, especially the Stilton cheese or the heavy-bodied cheese. Okay, whereas medium white wines or rosé wines would go with the lighter cheese like cream cheese. Sweet wines are offered with sweets and desserts, and whenever we are serving sweet wines with sweets, make sure that the wine is sweeter than the sweet that you're having. Okay, so otherwise it's going to overpower the wine. And lastly, you serve brandies and liqueurs at the end of the meal. Okay, so because the alcoholic content are more. So generally you serve something with a high alcoholic content only after the meals are over. Problem dishes are those dishes which you do not serve with the wines. For example, you have chocolate, do not serve wine with chocolates. Eggs, especially boiled eggs, okay, the wine turns off, it turns bland, it turns, it doesn't taste very nice. So do not serve wine with eggs. Highly acidic food such as relishes and salads, okay, with a very sharp dressing, ideally do not serve a wine. You could probably serve the wine or consume the wine along with your main course and not with your salad in case you're having a sharp dressing. And very spicy foods. And you must have probably seen that when you have alcohol with spicy food, the food tastes even more spicier. right? So that's the reason generally do not serve alcohol with food which is very, very spicy. Same with wines. And lastly, we go to the rules of tasting a wine. So if you have a glass of wine with you, then probably you could do what I'm telling you to do. Okay. So actually, I generally, when I conduct sessions like this, it is generally with the public in front of me or the people in front of me, and we are all having a glass of wine in our hands. And then we cheers, we go through this entire process, and then we enjoy the wine. Okay. But unfortunately, we are having this over Google Meet, and neither can you have wine. No, I can have wine now. With each other, okay, but we can have it in our own rooms, that's fine. So the 5 S's of wine tasting. First thing what we do is we begin by visually inspecting the wine, as we say, see. So the appearance of the wine is an essential part of its overall harmony, and this adds basically the pleasure to drinking. Now, so we have spoken about the winemaking process, and we have seen how intricate the process was, and how long it takes, and then clarifying the wine, etc., takes a lot of time, and we want to actually enjoy the wine, okay, in its full finesse. So the color of the wine, besides the clarity, may reveal a lot of things about the wine. For example, what type of a grape it was, what was the origin, what is the age, okay, a purple shade, whether it's a green shade, it has got a grassy note. All these type of things we'll see by looking at the wine, okay, by looking at the clarity, by looking at the luminousness of the wine. Next, what we do is we swirl the wine, we swirl the glass, okay, and swirling releases the bouquet. The bouquet is the flavor. So at this point of time, you could probably check the viscosity of the wine, that is the wine legs, as we say. Okay, generally wines with a higher alcoholic content or sweetness will have pronounced legs or tears that are coming down from the sides of the glass, as the wine settles down after swirling it. Generally, do not spend too much of time on this, okay, because most of these clues that you're trying to look out for, whether it is full-bodied or whether it is alcoholic content is high, you get all these things on the label of the bottle. Okay, so unless you are doing a blind tasting, do not spend too much time on this. Rather, you just read the label and see what is the vintage or what is the alcohol by volume or what is the grape variety on it. But okay, in case you want to do this kind of a thing like a pro, then you can do these things. It looks nice. Next, we look at the smell. So to release the aromas, take the glass, give it a nice swirl, allow the oxygen to enter the glass to release the scents, and then place your nose on top of the rim of the glass and take a short sniff. At this point of time, observe the intensity of the aromas and try to describe it, because every person's notion would be different. So when you start smelling the wine, think big to small, like, so are there fruits in this, for example? Okay, think of broad categories like citrus, tropical fruits, in case you're tasting white. So in case you're tasting reds, for example, think of berries, think of red fruits, think of black fruits, okay? Think of whether you're getting a fruity flavor or smell out of it or a floral smell out of it, okay? Do you feel yourself, you're in a flower shop or you're in a fruit shop, like, so that type of a thing. So this is what you generally smell these are the aromas that you're trying to get while you're smelling of or sniffing of the wine. The next step is to taste the wine, that is you sip the wine, okay? The taste is how we use our tongues to observe the wine, and rather than differently from how you're smelling it, once you swallow the wine, the aromas may change because you have actually you're receiving the as we say the the retronasally, you're actually getting the aromas of the wines now. So our tongue can detect saltiness, sourness, sweetness, bitterness, from different parts of the tongue, and that's why you need to actually, let the wine linger in your palate for some time before you actually swallow it down. Okay, so some wines are going to be sour, okay, because they have some kind of they inherit some acid inside. This depends on the climate and the grape variety. For example, Pinot Grigio is going to be slightly bitter. Okay, then we have some table wines wherein the grape sugars have been retained, so you can actually feel the sweetness in your tongue. Okay, and sometimes you find the dryness on the tongue, dryness on the palate in case there is the absence of sugar, for example, in the wines. Okay, so this is what you do when you sip the wine. And lastly, you savor the wine. So that means once you have sipped the wine, think, Think about what you have just tasted. Huh? Did the wine taste balanced, or was it out of balance? That means, was it too acidic, or was it too alcoholic, or was it too tannic in nature? Think of whether you like the wine. Was this wine unique? Was it memorable? Were there any characteristics that has impressed you in this wine? Okay, make notes of it, so in future then you can associate a wine by how you have liked it or whether you have not liked it. Okay, so if your wine, for example, is nuanced, it is express, it is textured, it has got a long finish, a pleasing finish, like that means you can remember the wine for a long time, and that what you remember is pleasant. Rest assured that you have a winner in your glass. Okay, and uh, you can then savor this for future also, for example, or recommend this wine to somebody else in future. Okay, and you can associate this wine to what you have just savored. So this is a little bit of this, and with this I think I'll come to the end of my presentation and say cheers here. So if you have a glass in your hand, then just cheer it and have a sip from it. Yeah, so if there are any questions, I'd like to take it now. This is my contact number here. So I have my WhatsApp number here. I have my YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. So if you type Edgar D'Souza in YouTube, you'll get my YouTube channels where I put a lot of videos as well connected to food and beverage. Then my Facebook profile also is Edgar D'Souza, and I'm on Instagram as well as Edgar P. D'Souza. Okay, and edgardesouza@hotmail.com is my email ID. So if you have any other questions or you'd like to get in touch with me on a later time, you want to interact with me for some reasons, then feel free to do so. Okay. Yes. I'm open to questions if any.
Well, there are a few questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
Chat box.
Yeah. Would you like to read them, or should I go to the chat box and see them?
I'll read it out for you if you want to.
Okay, I'll try to do justice to them.
So Renita Bonetto asks, can we add extra sugar to make it sweet or add less yeast?
Oh, add less yeast. See, what happens is yeast is required for fermentation. Okay, and if you put less yeast in the mast, you may not achieve the right amount of fermentation. So adding less yeast will not help you to achieve a sweet wine, but rather I would say you could do something called as a chapterization. Now, chapterization is a process wherein you add sugar. You add sugar to the wine. Okay, you could add the sugar depending on how much of sugar you'd like to, or how sweet you'd like your wine to be. So that can be done, and this could be done once the fermentation process is totally over, and when the wine is actually settling down to when you're clarifying the wine. At that point of time, you could probably add a little bit. So at this point of time, you could also add a little bit of potassium sorbate. Potassium sorbate. Yeah. So what this does to the wine is basically it kills the yeast cells which are present inside, and it'll help to clarify the wine also a bit, and doesn't aid the secondary fermentation in the bottle.
Okay.
Have I answered your question?
Yeah. So Nelita Coelho is asking, which are the good wines in Goa?
Okay, you mean the port wine, those type of things, or I didn't know. When you're saying good wines in Goa, is the wines which are available on the shelves, or are you talking about the port wines?
She just asked which are the good
in Goa.
wines.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Now,
if you're talking about port wines in Goa, port wines are not port wines. Okay, I've tasted a lot of port wines over here. See, if you have tasted the ports from Portugal, now those are the authentic port wines, right? And port cannot be more made in Goa, because port is a term that is generally associated with the wines from a particular area in Portugal, right? So The wines which are made in Goa and they call it as a port wine is a replica of those wines. But if you taste the wines in Goa, the port wines, I don't even think that these winemakers are adding any grapes inside those wines. Like, it's kind of a synthetic kind of a flavor that I get from those wines, but nothing close to the actual ports from Portugal. When you talk about the Indian brands which are there, as I said earlier, things like the Sula Rasa Shiraz is a nice wine. Most of the wines from growers, like the Ra Reserva, for example, these are very, very, very nice wines. Sula, growers, Zampa, that growers and Zampas have come together now. York, these are some of the Fratelli. Some of the excellent wines comes out from here, and they have internationally won a lot of awards as well. Okay, so yeah, so also it depends on whether you like to have sweet wines or you'd like to have dry wines. Sula, for example, makes a late harvest Chenin Blanc, which is a very nice sweet wine to have, And among the dry wines, then you have Zinfandel, okay, you have Shiraz for red. They're all very popular, very nice to drink.
Okay, someone is asking, does wine ever expire?
Does wine, okay, it depends on see, as I told you, the storage of the wine, how it is done. Okay, so if the wines are sealed, if they are kept in the cellar for a long time, nothing will happen to your wine. If it comes in contact with the oxygen but still it's in the refrigerator, it will stay for a long time. The wines that I make a lot of homemade wines. Generally the fruitier wines last for around 4 to 6 months, very good. After that, they start the color starts changing, and it will start getting amberish in color. That means basically it's coming in touch with oxygen, and fruity wines should be drunk when they are young. Whereas the wines like red wines that I make, the ginger wines that I make, they have a long shelf life. They can last you forever, because I have got some red wines and ginger wines that I've made some 2-3 years back, and they have only improved with over the age. And I've kept these wines, and I'm not selling these wines because, as a reminiscence of the wines that I've made in the past, and they only better by age.
Okay.
Yeah, next.
So Sushma is asking, if I want to become a wine aficionado or maybe a sommelier,
Yeah.
which one should I opt for? Courses by WSET or by Code of Master of Sommeliers?
Yeah, correct. Okay, so both these courses are valid. Okay, plus there are a lot of courses which are offered by these French vineyards, French winemakers also. Okay, they have this online courses which they have, which they certify you at the end of the day, and this certification will help you to apply as a sommelier somewhere. But I frankly say that doing courses and becoming a sommelier is not the best thing to do. Rather, you need to be actually associated with wines, because some of the places that I've worked for in the past, like for example, there's this Ristorante Al Tramonto in Maldives where I've worked. We had up to 350 different varieties of wines over there, right? So every time we had a boss who was very good, Chef Stefano Barberi. He would give us a tasting of these wines. Like, once a week we would all sit together and we would actually taste these wines, and then he would help us to understand what are the characteristics of this wine and what this wine would actually go with. So reading from the book and actually tasting these wines and being able to recommend these wines to the guests are two different things. Okay, so I would say taste the wines, appreciate these wines, and then only you'll be able to suggest something to the guest, rather than book knowledge. Right? But these courses are wonderful. I would not suggest online courses, rather, but this is a course wherein you're actually going to the vineyards, you're tasting different types of wines, you're doing blind tastings, you are able to denote what wine it is, but just by smelling it and by tasting it, then you're a true sommelier.
Okay, so Nelita is asking, are wines okay to have for someone who has diabetes?
So dry wines, absolutely, because dry wines have there is absolutely no sugar inside, because the sugars have totally been eaten up, okay, by the yeast. So yes, if you're diabetic, go in for a dry wine. Don't go in for a sweet wine. In case you still like to have a little bit of sugar, then you can go for a medium body, demi-sec kind of a wine, which is medium sweet. But I would suggest a dry wine, and it's absolutely fine to have a dry wine. Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of diabetics who are having dry wines.
Okay. What wines are made in Goa? Are other fruits used?
Yes. Okay. So on the shelf, you will not find. So retail, if you look at the retail market, you will not find fruit wines. No. Generally, the type of wines you will find in the retail market are only the red wine, the white wine. You'll find a little bit of rosé wine here and there, and the sparkling wines. But there are a lot of people in Goa who are making homemade wines. Yeah. Now, I cannot vouch for the quality of those wines. I can vouch for my wines; they're excellent. So you should try them. Uh, but yes, fruit wines can be made with just about any fruit that is sweet. Okay, it should have some sugar content, or else there are people making things like nutmeg wine and all those things, wherein basically you're adding a lot of sugar and making the wines. Okay, you're flavoring it with nutmeg, but it is all about sugar. So it is better to have wine which has got fructose, which has got natural sugars, and wherein you're adding only a little bit of sugar just to aid the fermentation process. Okay, so fruit wines can be made with just about any fruits, and there are quite a few winemakers in Goa who are making these homemade wines, but not in retail, because then you would require all these licensing issues, and and most of these winemakers are so small time. Generally, they prepare this wine just for family and friends and wouldn't like to go into the retail market. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any classes to teach wine?
I do conduct wine classes, yeah, from time to time, and I put it up on social media as well. I am a faculty at Goa University, and I teach food and beverage service over there. And in second years, generally, we learn a lot about alcoholic beverages. So in second years, we learn about wine making, we learn about wine regions of the world, we learn about wine and food pairing. I do wine appreciation classes for them as well. Okay, and I also teach them about all the other types of alcoholic beverages, from whiskey, brandy, gin, tequila, vodka, right up till Feni for that matter as well. Yeah, so we learn that all in the university. That's right.
Okay. So which type of container would you suggest for making homemade wines? Steel
Use the
or glass?
garrafons if you have them. If somebody has got garrafons, then please use them. You could use food grade plastic also, in case you don't have these glass containers. But if you have those earthen, old earthen pots, like those China, sorry, China, not earthen pots, the China pots, or the garrafons, the glass garrafons, use them. That's the best containers for fermentation and even storing for that matter.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Saga.
Where in Goa do we get potassium sorbate?
You can. I generally get it from Google. Sorry, from what I'm saying. From what's that? Yeah. What's this thing? That online shopping thing, man. Amazon, Amazon. Sorry, I was not getting it. Amazon has got it. Okay, Amazon. Sorry. Yeah, Frederick. Amazon. Yeah. Flipkart
Okay.
also would have it.
Yeah. Can you
Sorry, I'm
please
letting Sinan.
explain? No problem. That is fine. Can you please explain the method of arresting the fermentation process?
Sorry, I didn't get you. What fermentation was this?
Arresting the fermentation
Stopping the
process.
fermentation process, you mean?
Yeah, maybe.
It naturally stops. So once the yeast have consumed the sugar in the liquid, the fermentation process would stop. So generally, what we get is we get something called as a fermenter, which we put on top of these fermentation jars, and we put a little bit of water inside. So as the carbon dioxide gas is escaping, it will form those bubbles inside these fermenters. And after a period of 1 week or so, these bubbles, they would stop. Okay, which means that the fermentation process is over. Generally, we would allow the fruits to stay inside the fermentation tank for another week or so. So around 15 to 20 days is what I would see, that you would generally keep the fruits, even irrespective of whether the fermentation has stopped even after a week. Okay, you just leave it because you want the fruits to macerate inside this liquid. Okay, and that's how you will get the flavors out of a fruity wine. You do not stop the fermentation process unless you want a very sweet wine. Okay, but then the alcoholic content will be low.
Okay. Any red wines which can be drink chilled?
Yeah, so younger the wine, So a very, very young wine, as I showed in my chart as well, like, so and something like Pinot Noir, for example, which is young. Okay, things like Shiraz, Cabernet Sauvignon, these have it closer to room temperature. But anything that is young red wine from Italy, Valpolicella, Bardolino, these type of things can be consumed. When I say chilled, don't have it chilled, as in have it between 16 to 18 degrees. Okay, no, not chilled. I wouldn't say chilled, because they have a lot of aromas and you're basically masking your palate. Okay, and the aromas will not come out if something is chilled. It's like uh, see, you drink a black tea, no, and you'll see how bitter the tea tastes, whereas the same thing, you have it as an iced tea or you have a hot tea, it's going to mask your palate and you will not get that intense flavors out of the tea. So something like that. So don't have it chilled, no.
Okay,
And don't have it at room temperature either. Don't have it at 22, 24 degrees either. Okay, it's going to taste off.
fine. So what suggestions do you have for storing wines with regard to Goa's climate? Is a wine cooler
Chill
needed
it, chill
or
it, chill it. Put it into the fridge. Do not keep it outside. A white
okay?
wine, do not keep it outside, I would say.
Also, can you re-refrigerate after opening?
Yes, yes, you can. You can. A wine will stay. A white wine, okay, would stay for up to 3 to 4 weeks without any issues. Okay, if it is refrigerated properly. Okay, no issues.
Okay, some recipe says it says that
Hmm.
we need to stir the mixture every day for
Every
21
day.
days.
No, not 21 days. No, not 21 days. That means you're not allowing the wine to settle down. Okay, I would say as long as the fermentation process is going on, keep on stirring it. The reason that you stir the wine for up to a week every day is because what happens is there's a must which forms on a layer that forms on the top of the wine, and this blocks the carbon dioxide gas from escaping. Okay, so as long as the fermentation process is happening, we want the carbon dioxide gas to escape. If you are going to trap the carbon dioxide gas in the wine, then it will result in a very frizzante kind of a wine, very frizzy kind of a wine, and we don't want that to happen. If you want to make a sparkling wine, then you're going to seal the container so that the carbon dioxide gas doesn't escape. Okay, so here we want to release it, and that's the reason we keep stirring the contents every day. Okay, so that the gas escapes, it does not form a lees on top of the wine. Another reason that we stir it is also to bring out the fruitiness of the wine. Okay, to allow the pulp to macerate well into the liquid, and that's why we stir it. But don't have to stir it for 21 days. No, see, what happens is every time you stir it, you are going to make it cloudy, correct? So the yeast cells, the lees is again going to come up every now and then, and where is the time for it to settle? So after a week or so, leave it, because the fermentation process is over. There's nothing to stir after that. Sometimes what happens is all that lees goes down and settles at the bottom of the tank as well. Okay, so allow it to settle, because the more you'll allow it to settle, the clearer will be your wine later.
Okay, so can we depend solely on native yeast for
No,
fermentation instead of cultured yeast?
no, we cannot. We cannot. Now, if you're talking about grapes, see, what happens is these grapes are washed sometimes. If you're talking about the grapes that are grown, you find in the market now, that's not the right grapes to make wines. Okay, as I showed you pictures also. There's things like Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, okay, Zinfandel. These are the type of grapes that are used for wine making. It's You can make wine with the grapes which are found in the market as well. Okay, but the body will not be the same as the body you would get from the other grapes. Okay, uh, the in the vineyards, when the grapes are growing, okay, naturally, that's where the yeast comes in contact with these grapes. Now, if they are going to be marketed, they are going from one container to the other container, they are washed sometimes. Okay, we are losing out on a lot of these natural yeast which is present on those blooms, and that's why when the wines are harvested, when the grapes are harvested, they are immediately taken to the vineyard and they are pressed. Okay, so if you're going to buy the grapes from the market and then you expect the yeast to still be there on top of that and try to make wine out of it, it's not going to happen. And that's why you need to add some additional yeast to it. You will not get a fermentation otherwise.
Okay, some people get a headache after drinking wine and some people get rash. What could be the reason of it?
A rash, then probably you've got some allergy issues. But headache is because of the esters and the acids which are present in the wine. Okay. See, what happens is when the fermentation takes place, we get carbon dioxide and we get alcohol. Now, these alcohols have got a lot of minerals which are present inside, a lot of chemicals which are present inside, which are responsible for they're called as congeners, okay, which are a technical term. And these congeners which are present in the alcohol is actually what gives this headache. And it's very natural. Okay, so if you're going to have a bottle of wine, the next day you can expect a headache. Uh, when you distill something also, when you distill something, any wine for that matter, if you're going to distill it, you will get brandy out of it. Okay. Now, brandy also have got a lot of congeners inside. And if you're going to have brandy, a lot of brandy, next day you're going to get a headache. If you prepare alcohol which is done by a method called as a patent still or a continuous still, here the congeners are lost during the process of distillation and resulting in a very neutral alcohol which is called as neutral spirit. Okay, and this will not give you those headaches. So that's why you generally go in for a vodka or a white rum, and this type of spirits will never give you a hangover the next day.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Is it possible you can suggest a red wine that can be served with fish dishes?
Red wine with fish, please do not have. Please do not have red wine with fish. See, what happens is the composition of red wine is such that doesn't agree with the with the flavor of the fish. Like, it'll put off. See, what will happen is the fish also will not taste nice, and the wine also will not taste nice when you are sipping along with it. Okay, so fish and red wine is a no-no. It's a very, very bad combination to have. What goes into the marination of cooking something is something that you would accompany along with it. For example, if you're going to marinate the fish with vinegar or with lime, then you would choose a wine which is also acidic in nature, and red wines are not acidic in nature. Okay, and that's why you generally need to go in for a white wine along with fish and not red wine. Okay, something like a Pinot Grigio, something like a Soave would go very well along with the fish that you are having. Now,
Okay.
sorry, let me come to this. In case you're having something like a salmon, which is a pink fish, okay, not a white fish, then you could go in for a rosé wine, but still not a red wine. Yeah, sorry.
Fine. Ruth Da Costa is asking, where can we buy wine from you?
I had given you all my number, right? Okay, so my number is 976 355 405. 976 355 405. You could contact me and I'll make the wine available for you. Yeah, thank you, Savio. Thank you, Savio.
Okay.
That's my phone
So
number.
how do we order your wines to Bangalore? Do you even
No. Please don't take it to Bangalore. You'll have some excise issues. I don't know. I'm really not sure. See, there are a lot of people who come and take my wines to Mumbai and things like that. But see, the thing is, I'm not giving them any permit. No, I don't even know whether permit would be required for traveling. So if you're ready to take the wines, then go ahead, take it. Yeah, but I will not be able to courier it to Bangalore or Mumbai or anything like that. It's not permitted.
Okay, so Anna Pereira is interested on food and wine pairing. So do you conduct
Yeah. In case I conduct a session like this, but it has to be a physical session. I can't conduct it online. Okay, so once things get better, probably I could organize a session on food and wine pairing. I do that sometimes, and I'll let you know in case I'm doing that. Thank you, Verenka. Thank you, Verenka. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, if anybody else is having any question, they can still drop it in the chat box, or they can even unmute themselves and ask it directly to Edgar sir.
Yes, please. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Emilia. Laila, tell me.
I would just like to ask, which cuisine do you think is most compatible with wines? Would it be the French cuisine, since most French wines suit that palate?
Uh, any cuisine, Laila, any cuisine of the world you can have wine with. Wine goes very well with Indian food as well. Okay, there's a misconception that wine doesn't go well with Indian food, but some fantastic pairings you can have, like, see, any wine which has got slight spicy afternotes, like a Riesling in white, like a Gewürztraminer in white, like a Shiraz in red. Uh, these wines will go very well with our Indian foods, okay? Unless the food is very, very spicy, then I would not suggest the wine. But just about any cuisine, Laila, just about any cuisine, Italian foods, French foods, anything. And that's why you have wines in Germany, you have wines in Portugal. People in Portugal drink wine like water, okay? Because it goes so well with their foods. So I wouldn't say that it suits only the European kind of food. It will go just about with any kind of food, unless it's going to be super spicy. Then no, otherwise any kind of food. I had made wine from pineapple, but I didn't like. Sorry, let me see that. I had made wine from pineapple, but I didn't like the smell, and it became sour. Renita, you buy my wine, pineapple wine, and you tell me how it is. Okay, yeah. See, probably what happened was, your wine came in contact with the oxygen and it acidified, and that's why it tasted sour. Okay, but see, it's very important when we make homemade wines, no, that the equipment that we're using is thoroughly sanitized. Otherwise, it is definitely going to turn into vinegar. Okay, it will turn sour. You taste my pineapple wine and then you tell me. Session was interesting and informative. Thank you, Tanya. Anna, is port or sherry can be paired with chocolates? Do not pair wines with chocolates. Okay, so you can give me the chocolates and you can have the port, or you give me the port and you can have the chocolates. Does red wine become darker or lighter over time? It changes into a brownish kind of a color over time, Priya. Okay, so a red wine, it starts off with a very purple kind of a color. It becomes slightly deeper in color, deeper red in color, and over a period of time, it turns into a brownish tinge. Okay, and so that's how it evolves. Renita, a batch turned good though. Good for you, Renita. Good for you. Any wine that goes well with cheese? Yes. A very flavorful cheese will need a very flavorful wine. And that's why you generally go for a fortified wine like a sherry or a port along with cheese. Fruity Sula. Actually, all the wines of Sula are fruity in nature because they are all young wines. Do you think Goa is a place to start farms? No, Albert, no. For Goa is not a place to start farms for vineyards because, as I said, you require those cold climates. No, you need that cold temperature. You need slopes. You need that kind of a place where the water retention is less. Plus, in Goa, we have a lot of rainfall, which also would spoil the crop. Okay, so minimum amount of rainfall, a good summer and a good winter is what we look at to have a vineyard. So I would think Goa would be a suitable climate to have vineyards. No.
So if anybody still wants to interact with Edgar, so they can even unmute themselves and talk to him.
Rani, I sell my wines at home. Actually, it's just a passion. I'm not a retailer. I'm not a wholesaler. No, I just make wines for passion. And in case the wines are extra, then I end up selling them. Otherwise, I generally distribute to my friends and relatives.
Fine then. I would now ask Laila to kindly propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah, that was a very well detailed presentation, right from understanding the grapes that are used and the glasses and faults concerning wine. And we've not only learned from a sommelier over here, but we've also learned from a winemaker himself. And I'm sure there are quite a few winemakers and wine enthusiasts who have benefited from the information today. And even with each question that you've answered candidly, sir, you've added a new element to the topic. Personally, I hadn't heard of nutmeg wine until today. So I would like to thank you for your time to share this knowledge with us. And I would also like to thank the organizers for bringing this talk to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. Thank you for contacting me to deliver this session. Thank you, Chrislyn, for coordinating the session, as well as Savio Dias for all the technical related support that you've given me. Really appreciate it.